So where are we now? Slide 4?
We are indeed.
Okay.
So let's talk about something called the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equal Opportunity Leadership Conference. And this conference has been curtailed, but not without a certain amount of skullduggery, in my view. Slide 4, please. I attended the 20th annual conference, ODIEO Leadership Conference in August of 2023. It was several days, very, very well run conference, by the way. And that conference was, and this had been going on for 20 years up at West Point, had been announced, it was announced at that conference that this had been endowed in perpetuity by a gentleman by the name of Herman Bulls, class of 1978, and a very wealthy graduate, probably has even more money than Larry does. And he endowed this, as I said, in perpetuity. The conference normally takes place in August. In view of the fact that Mr. Bowles had endowed this in perpetuity, it was renamed. The next one would be the 21st Annual Herman and Iris Bowles 78 Family West Point Diversity and Inclusion Leadership Conference. If you're going to endow something in perpetuity, I think you can add your name to it and your wife's name to it.
Sure.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Yep.
Slide off. The Association of Graduates promoted this conference on its website for 8 months. It was postponed twice, I think because they wanted to see how the election was going to go. But I definitely plan to attend again. On January 21st, think about the date, on January 21st, it underwent a name change. All of a sudden, as you'll see by the next slide, it became the Herman and Iris Bowles Family Legacy of Graduates and Leaders Forum. So it went from being the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Equal Opportunity Leadership Conference to the Herman and Iris Bowles Family Legacy of Graduates and Leaders Forum. Now,
1984.
So as you'll see from slide 5, it was exactly the same schedule and the same speakers. They just changed the name. They didn't even change the picture, as you'll see from slide 5. And like I said, in EO 14151, that EO specifically forbids activities from being misleadingly relabeled in an attempt to, and I'm quoting here, to preserve their pre-November 4th, 2024 function. That's clearly what they were doing here. And the slide, as I said, spot the difference. They used exactly the same picture. They just changed the name, and they didn't even change the speakers or the schedule on it. Because I know, because I plan to attend. I had downloaded the schedule. I contacted Colonel Retired Mark Beeger, who is the president of the West Point Association of Graduates, who had been sponsoring this. And I said, Mark, you can't do this. This is a violation of the executive order. West Point is a military facility. You can't violate this executive order. West Point is in enough trouble with all of these other scandals. And so finally he called me back the next day and he said, okay, yeah, we've canceled it. So slide off. So,
Are they going to reinstitute it under a different agenda?
I don't think so. Not as long as the executive order is in effect.
But couldn't you have something along leadership lines without getting down this rabbit hole of diversity, inclusion, and equity?
That conference, and as I said, I attended in August of 2023. That conference, I wrote an article actually afterwards, and the title of the article was published in a number of venues, The title was something like, "When a Diversity Conference Would Benefit from an Increase in Diversity," because there was no diversity in that diversity conference.
Gotcha.
You were force-fed that diversity is our greatest strength. Although, interestingly enough, in that conference, even though they repeated ad nauseum how important diversity was and having more minorities and more women in positions of responsibility, they cited absolutely no empirical data to support that. None, zero. And I wish it had been my question, it wasn't, but somebody asked the USMA, the West Point data officer. I didn't know West Point had that position, but it's a colonel by the name of Evangelista, if I remember correctly. Somebody asked him, do you have diversity, do you have data to support this? And to his great credit and to his professional integrity, I felt, he said, no, we don't have data to support that, but we hope to get it soon. I think that's almost a direct quote. Anyway, what we found subsequently is that that diversity training actually is not just neutral, it actually causes harm. The data is coming out that it's actually, the whole DEI program has actually been harmful, definitely not helpful, and not even neutral.
Yeah. Martin Luther King must be rolling over in his grave. The speech about character of content, not of color.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're saying here. I'd like to go now to the last point that I'd like to spend quite a few, or not quite a few, but a few minutes on.
Okay.
And I'm talking about this incident involving then Secretary of Defense nominee Pete Hegseth.
Yes.
And let me give you the background on this. After he'd been nominated, but prior to his confirmation by the Senate, you may remember that back in December that his confirmation was very much in question. And there were a lot of folks saying, well, we don't know whether he has the votes in the Senate to actually be confirmed. Mr. Hegseth had made no secret of his animosity towards DEI.
Yes.
I'd written a whole book, which I strongly recommend, War on Warriors is the title of it. And so he was definitely against the whole DEI concept and could be counted upon, if he got confirmed by the Senate, to just take an axe to a lot of the DEI and the whole Department of Defense. But at this point, we're talking about basically early December, his confirmation was very much in question. Now, what happened was that a news outlet, I'd never heard of it before, named ProPublica, described by people that I know as a very left-wing media outlet,
Yes.
was in the process of doing a hit piece on Pete Hegseth. Now, Mr. Hegseth had claimed repeatedly that he had been admitted to the military academy and turned down that attendance at West Point in order to go to, I think it was Princeton that he ended up going to. But he claimed that he had gone to West Point. ProPublica reached out not once but twice to West Point to confirm or deny that Mr. Hegseth had been accepted at West Point and turned down his appointment. West Point said, not once but twice, that he had not been admitted, okay? That he had not even opened a file. The next day, December 11th, Pete Hegseth produced his letter of admission signed by the superintendent. I could not have done that. But he was able in 24 hours to pull his acceptance letter out and say, hey, here it says I've been admitted to the military academy. There's something very, very wrong here, okay? The Public Affairs Office at West Point, published a statement saying this was an incorrect statement, saying that he had not been admitted to the military academy. It was an incorrect statement. And the incorrect statement, and I'm quoting, was released by an employee. West Point apologizes for this administrative error. Ooh, wait a minute, time out, okay? Let me have slide 6, please. You will see on the right there a wire diagram of the Office of Public Affairs and Communications. That's headed by an Army full colonel, 06, Terrence Kelly. That happens to be his name. I've met him. And you'll see under that there is a chief of affairs, the Public Affairs Division. There are 2 divisions. And the person that made that incorrect statement was not just an employee. It was a lady by the name of Teresa Brinkerhoff, who happens to be, or have been, the division chief. She's the chief of that division, okay? We're not talking about a summer intern, some college kid that just goofed up and essentially said that the Secretary of Defense nominee was lying. This is the division chief. Ms. Brinkerhoff has some 30 years of experience in the Public Affairs Office. She has a staff of 12, okay? So we're not talking about somebody who didn't know better. And I have talked to a number of people who have served as public affairs officers. They said when a query like this comes in to a PAO office, anywhere, even in industry, this is what they call a hot potato. And several of the PAOs that I talked to had served in the Army as PAOs said this kind of query comes in and you run, you don't walk to the chief of staff to say, uh-oh, we got a hot one. How are we going to respond to this? For her to say, not once but twice, he was not admitted. She didn't say he was lying, but that was what ProPublica was going to publish. And then also you'll see on that slide a quote from the fall 2023 edition of West Point magazine, in which she says, and this is a quote from her, "We're asked all the time to participate in media engagements." I'm sure they are. All productions must provide significant benefit back to the Academy to tell our story. No problems there. Meet legal and DA level approvals. And, you'll see at the bottom, receive a green light by the superintendent. Now, we don't know what the superintendent knew about this or when, although PAOs that I talked to said that this should go right up the chain of command, because this is the nominee to be the Secretary of Defense. We're not talking about somebody that's going to, Captain Schmedlap that, commands a rifle company in the 82nd Airborne Division.
Yeah.
So anyway, I have submitted an official Freedom of Information Act request on this. And by federal law, the federal agency is supposed to respond within 20 business days to an FOIA request. I'm now waiting 3 months.
But you've had this happen to you before, though.
I have indeed.
Yes.
For one previous FOIA request that I just got answered, I waited 31 months for it. I finally got an answer, and everything that I was asking about got redacted. But anyway, so I've got an FOIA request in on this, and there's also a lawsuit by the Center to Advance Security in America. They filed a lawsuit on this. This just doesn't seem possible to me that somebody with 30 years of experience, the chief of the Public Affairs Division, would have just so offhandedly implied that the Secretary of Defense nominee was lying about
Yeah.
what he
Yeah,
claimed.
I mean, yeah. Her ultimate boss.
Yes, her ultimate boss. My goodness gracious.
I think I'd be careful.
Anyway, now Senator, then Representative Jim Banks, sent a letter to the superintendent in which he found it, he described it as an apparent attempt by the Military Academy Public Affairs Office to interfere in the nomination of the next Secretary of Defense. And this is Senator Banks now, who happens to sit on the Senate Armed Services Committee, by the way. And he continues in his letter to the superintendent, "It is outrageous that West Point officials would so grossly interfere in a political process and make false claims regarding a presidential nominee." Woo!
Yeah.
Ouch!
Yeah.
Ouch!
We'll see how this plays out, huh?
We will.
Okay, so is there optimism for the future, Bill?
I hope so. I believe so, actually. But we need to remain vigilant. As I said, we believe that the executive orders have done a great deal of good in changing some things at West Point and indeed the other service academies as well. But we need to remain vigilant. I am sorry to say that I feel there are people in the service academies and in the Department of Defense and the U.S. government that still adhere to a woke agenda and want to continue to push that to the extent that they can. They prefer to work in the shadows, and so I fear that for now they are keeping their heads down. But we have seen some definite progress. For example, I mentioned the minor in diversity and inclusion. That is gone. The superintendent testified on the 26th of March at a congressional hearing with the subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee on the 26th of March, testified that HI 463, Race, Ethnicity, and Nation, is no longer offered as a course. And N352, Power and Difference, is gone. Why taxpayers are spending their tax dollars to fund those courses, I don't know. Apparently, we still have social inequality. We still have cadets, offered to cadets, the politics of race, gender, and sexuality. And you still have the opportunity to take what my favorite is, HI 461, Sex and Civilizations, also known as Topics in Gender History.
Is there a wait list to get into that course?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
The Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equal Opportunity, as I mentioned, was disestablished back in August of 2024, immediately replaced by the Office of Engagement and Retention. The Office of Engagement and Retention is now gone. I don't know if Lisa Benitez, who was in charge of both of those offices, I don't know whether she's still employed up there, but we hope to find out. And the Naval Academy just announced on the 28th of March that they will no longer use race as any part of the admissions process. This is something we've been pushing for in the last 2 years since we got established. As Larry said, we harken back to Martin Luther King's, one of the content of my character, not the color of my skin. We want the content of their character. And so probably most of the viewers know that the Supreme Court found that Harvard, which is my other alma mater, and University of North Carolina could not use race as a criteria for admissions. They gave a set aside for the service academies. So the service academies have been involved in a lawsuit up until just very recently, trying to defend their ability to use race as part of the admissions process. Anyway, the Naval Academy just announced that they would not use race anymore. This is huge, and I fully expect that the other service academies will go along. And also, you may know, there's something called the Board of Visitors. For all the service academies have these, and it's a combination of senators, members of the House, and also presidential appointees. Roughly a half dozen in each category. And when President Biden took over, he fired all of President Trump's appointees, which was unprecedented. Well, anyway, when President Trump became president again, he turned around and fired all Biden's appointees. The executive summary for that is, we believe there are some tremendous people that President Trump has assigned to the Board of Visitors as his appointees. So we're looking forward to working very closely with some, perhaps all of them, 6 of them. We're very, very pleased with the quality of persons that President Trump has assigned to the Board of Visitors. And then just 2 or 3 days ago, the Air Force Academy announced that they would be reducing the number of civilian professors and increasing the number of active duty officers that are teaching cadets at the Air Force Academy.
What percentage of the teaching staff was civilian?
Great question.
And also for the West Point, I'd like to...
Yeah, great question. The Naval Academy has traditionally had about 50-50, 50% serving military officers and 50% civilian professors on contract. The Air Force Academy, I think, had about 46%. West Point had the lowest, and I think they had about 26% civilian and the rest serving military officers. We have felt very strongly that the cadets at West Point benefit greatly by having active duty military officers as instructors there. The program, I was offered to go back to West Point as an instructor. I did not go. The program, I felt, was an excellent one. You go fully funded to get a master's degree in whatever discipline you've been invited back to teach. You come out with a master's degree, and then you go back, in case of West Point, you go to West Point as I think I'm called an assistant professor, associate professor, something like that. And you teach that for 2 or extendable to 3 years as a professor working with cadets, and then you go back to the Army. And the reason why I feel so strongly about this is, when I was a cadet at West Point, a lot of us were on our way to Vietnam. I was. And I don't mean this to sound cynical at all, but during that time period, you had serving Army officers who would go to graduate school for 2 years, and then they would go to West Point as an instructor for 2 or 3 years. So basically they were out of the Army, if you will, for 5 years. And we used to joke that the professors would call infantry branch toward the end of their assignment at West Point, and infantry branch would say, "Guess what, pal? You're going to Vietnam." I ran into, and I've said this I think in previous podcasts, I think I ran into 6 of my former instructors at West Point when I went to Vietnam. Now, the important part of this is, if you're instructing cadets, there's a fairly good chance that some of those cadets are going to be working for you later on when you're Major so-and-so or Lieutenant Colonel so-and-so and they're Lieutenant or Captain so-and-so. So they have a vested interest in mentoring you. The civilian professors, unfortunately, and I've seen this and have done studies on this, the civilian professors are coming in with wonderful academic credentials. They've PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. I mean, I'm sure they're just...
But doesn't this fact that you don't have PhDs teaching affect the ranking on national in these institutions?
Great question. Actually, it's amazing how smart this guy is. No, that is a great question.
Thanks, Uncle Bill.
Yeah. There is a problem with accreditation that, and also with the rankings, U.S. News and World Report, and all of that, and West Point. In my view, my personal view, West Point likes to advertise that they have the same number of Rhodes Scholars as my other alma mater, Harvard, does. I have a problem with that, and that is we ought to be training cadets at the military academy or midshipmen at the Naval Academy to fight and win our wars. I'm not sure that sending them off to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar is really an important thing for them. Now, if you want to be a Rhodes Scholar, then you go to Boston College or Boston University or Harvard or any number of other excellent schools. But the service academies should be all about preparing cadets and midshipmen to fight and win our wars. And so that's why we believe that the focus should be increasing the number of active duty military officers coming back to the academies and fewer civilian professors coming out of places like University of California or Berkeley. And because we're not really sure that the worldview that some of these civilian professors have really appropriate for training cadets and midshipmen to fight and win our wars.
Okay. Any final thoughts on this whole subject, Bill? It's been very interesting.
Well, as I said at the start, the American Security Council Foundation, I have been thoroughly impressed for a number of years. Actually, I really go back into the 1970s when I first got associated with the American Security Council Foundation. I think it was probably about 1978 that I first heard about American Security Council Foundation. And this organization does critically important work. And we need to remain vigilant. Yes. I know a lot of people, I've been criticized, I don't know how many times, from friends, classmates who have said to me, well, you know, the administration's taking care of all this. You go back to bed, you hit the golf course or whatever you want to do. And we can't. We have to remain vigilant.
Yes.
Because there is an element, I believe, that wants to continue to push a woke agenda in our military, in our government, and in our society. And they prefer to operate in the shadows, which is why we need to maintain the spotlight and be ready to shine the spotlight on. And also, I'm obviously very biased on this. We have a tremendous website. If you will go to MacArthurSociety.org or just type in MacArthur Society, we have a great website with articles on there, articles that you will not read in the mainstream media. Focused on, in our case, West Point, to a lesser extent, the other service academies, and to a somewhat extent to the military writ large. But it has some great articles. So if you want to stay informed on what's going on, especially at West Point, come to our website, MacArthurSociety.org, or just type in MacArthur Society. It comes up first if you do the search for it.
Thank you, Bill. As always, it's been a pleasure, and we also thank our listeners to our American Security Council Foundation podcast. Our motto, and Bill referred back to the 70s, has been peace through strength, and certainly it was highlighted during President Reagan's era, and it seems to be coming back in President Trump's era of more and more people talking about peace through strength. So not only do we do podcasts with such distinguished visitors as Bill Prince, but we have other people that talk about a variety of other issues, primarily on issues of national security. So you can follow us on YouTube's Rumble, and we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. So And last but not least, look us up on our website, which will include Bill Prince's podcast with us, which is www.ascf.us. So again, thank you for joining us, and have a pleasant day. Take care.